You're listening to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary acapella. I'm Evan.
And I'm Kayla. And this week we have Erin Hackel on. Erin has a background in vocal performance and is the director of Lark and Mix at University of Colorado, Denver. During this episode, we talked about how she navigated her way from a classical background to acapella and some techniques she uses for good vocal health and singing, as well as collaborative arranging.
In case you hadn't already heard, SoJam 15 is this weekend. Erin is going to be teaching a class on her Spectrum singing course, and she'll be sitting on a music director's panel as well. If you're a longtime listener, you'll be sure to recognize a bunch of your favorite guests this weekend,
as well as your favorite Head Voice co-host.
So don't hesitate to say hi. As always, any references for the episode can be found in the show notes. Give us a like on Facebook if you haven't already. Give us a iTunes review if you haven't already. That would be much appreciated. And you know what? Happy Halloween, my friends.
Awesome. Hi, Erin.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us on Head Voice.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for asking.
Of course. We're happy to have you on. So first question we like to ask our guests is kind of, if you don't mind just giving us a little introduction of yourself and where you're from.
Sure. Well, my name's Erin Hackel, and I am currently located close to Boulder, Colorado. And I am a professor of voice at the University of Colorado, Denver.
Your background wasn't necessarily in acapella for all the years that you've done music. So could you kind of speak to your experience doing non-acapella stuff leading up to teaching at UCD?
Yeah, for sure. It was probably the last thing that I ever thought would happen in my life, which maybe is very typical for many people. But I had a very classical sort of growing up. My mom is actually an immigrant from Norway, and she was a member of the Norwegian National Girls Choir, which was a very sort of progressive and classical choir. And so she had all of us singing when we were very young and working with Orff instruments. And, I had classical voice lessons and I had classical flute lessons. And I went and did a bachelor's of voice performance at James Madison, which is in Virginia. Loved it. It was the best thing ever. And then I went and got a master's in upstate New York because you're not super employable as a 21-year-old classical singer unless you're, going to make your career right away. So I went up and did a master's in opera. In upstate New York, where I got to actually sing with a professional opera company there and get some real sort of honest to goodness stage operatic experience singing there. Yeah. And by then I pretty much knew that I wanted to be a teacher at the college level. And so I applied for one of the, at the time, very few programs in the United States that wasn't a doctorate in voice performance. It was a doctorate in voice performance and pedagogy. So, and that was at CU Boulder. So I drove across the country in my little Honda with my dog in the back seat and did a doctoral degree in Boulder. And while I was there, I did all opera, oratorio, classical singing. All my recitals were completely classically oriented. My specialty, believe it or not, was 19th century female Norwegian musicians.
All the rage right now.
I know. You can find some of my articles on them, actually, if you go looking. And I also sang in operas there and also in musicals. So my entire sort of past has been completely classically oriented.
And so now that you're working with groups like Lark and Mix, what is it about acapella that draws you in, or what is it that makes you so interested in it?
Gosh, it's a really long journey, I have to say, because I was hired at CU Denver, which is one of the only contemporary music programs in the United States. And I really had no idea what I was doing, not even a little clue, like, no idea. And so, and I was kind of thrown into, the waters, and as a young professional, when, your boss comes to you and says, "Oh, will you teach a contemporary choir?" And of course you say, "Oh, yes, absolutely. I can do that." And then you walk off stage left and have a panic attack because you have no idea how to do that. So, my first semester of running an acapella group, I just sort of tried to make a little bridge. And so I think I had 9 singers, non-auditioned. The ensemble was called the Acapella Ensemble. I think I had a 65-year-old dentist in there. I remember him very strongly. And we did, and I was like, oh, what's in between classical and contemporary? So I feel like I've got one foot where I'm comfortable. And so I had some king singers kind of stuff, things where I was like, I'm still kind of comfortable. And it was a real evolution of me actually figuring out there even was an acapella world.
Yeah.
And then when I found it, I was immediately like, oh, this is fantastic. I mean, look how much freedom you have, as compared to, the classical paradigm where, you're singing in rows and you have your pencil and you're desperately marking your music and there is an exact right way to sing it and everything else is wrong.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like opening a kind of a Pandora's box, I guess, where just all these sort of delightful things came floating my way. But I was really bad at it for quite a while. And my first groups lost all the time. We would enter local competitions and lose and lose and lose. So it was a real evolution for me to figure out what is this genre and how can I find a place in here.
Yeah. Was it like a cappella competitions or just like music talent shows? Or
the first thing that I entered, I think was a Mile High vocal jam that Tony Huerta organized, and I mean, it must have been 8 or 9 years ago, and I didn't even know really what that looked like. I didn't know that there could be movement. I didn't know, that there could be, arrangements that weren't written by a professional, that you've purchased it from. And so, I just sort of got dumped into an audience where all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, okay. And then I would come back. I did a harmony sweepstakes. I think I did 2 harmony sweepstakes. Lost terribly. Lost so badly. And then I finally took mix to ICCA, and we got put all the way on the West Coast. We were in California, so it was this huge trip, and somehow managed to squeak a second place in a quarterfinal, which was miraculous. And went to the semis, and I felt like I had entered this. I mean, I felt like I was so out of my league. It was almost like a acapella Hunger Games, and my team was like definitely gonna die, right? It's like, as I'm watching this competition, it had just, I mean, who was in there? The SoCal Vocals, maybe, Vocal Point doing their Michael Jackson shtick. That was back in that day, and they were so good. I just lost my mind. But I learned so much, and I just kept evolving and changing and figuring out what is interesting and what's not, and what wins and what doesn't. And but it was many years.
Yeah. So how did you get from the acapella ensemble to Lark and Mix, having 2 groups under your wing?
I guess the biggest thing that happened besides me being very, very interested in it from the beginning, is that I changed up the rehearsal process. And that was the first thing that I did, because our ensembles are classes, and our ensembles generally at that time met for 2 hours and 15 minutes once a week. And that was their meeting time. And that does not make a very good group. I mean, it's just it's not enough time, especially when you're not professionals. And so I changed to a model where they were meeting from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So a massive increase in rehearsal time. And that's just donated on part of the students and me, because we love it and we want to be there and we want to make something fantastic. And then as the years went by, I figured out that reading from written arrangements was a strength that I had as a long-time classical singer, but it wasn't a strength that my contemporary voice majors had. They didn't grow up singing in those classical choirs, and they were in a contemporary program to sing contemporary music, which, arguably is more simplistic, right, than very difficult, like bar talk or singing some very, very technical classical things. And so I felt like I needed to stop banging my head against a brick wall and pounding out notes for these people, because they were such strong oral learners. And if I just let them loose without putting a physical arrangement in front of them, and I guided them through an arrangement, the result became 1,000 times better than what we had been doing.
Yeah. And to that point, you taught a class at Boston Sings that was on collaborative arranging. And earlier you mentioned how when you first stepped into the acapella scene, you were like, this is so odd. These people are singing music that isn't created by professionals, or it's not something that's purchased.
Right.
So what was that like, trying to navigate this new world of collaborative singing and arranging and making that the core of the music that you're singing?
Well, it felt liberating, and played to some strengths that I didn't know I had. As a classical singer, I always felt like I was put in this teeny tiny little box, and I wasn't allowed to step outside of it, and all of a sudden, I had 7 singers standing in front of me around a piano, and we could do whatever we wanted. Yeah. And so essentially, it felt great. That said, it's hard. Yeah. It's not easy to create something out of literally nothing. Yeah. And it takes a really long time. I'd say, up to 40 hours for an arrangement, depending, from start to finish, because it's painful. And everybody, essentially, everybody is an arranger. I'm the lead, right? I'm the point person. But in a lot of ways, that means I'm the one who's asking all the questions, right? And so I'm going, okay, here's the bridge in the original tune, which we're so far off of now that it almost doesn't matter. Do we want to do a bridge? And then everybody has to go, like, really think, and go, we've got verse chorus, we've got that weird chorus we made, and we don't know where that's going to live yet. So maybe a bridge before that. And we all go, okay, let's make one, and so it's a very, it's a long process, but it is extremely creative, which is what I want to be doing. Yeah. In the end, I don't want to be pounding out notes for people, and it satisfies me to tap into their individual talents, and let them sing.
Yeah.
sing what they're good at.
Yeah.
You know? And it feels good. It feels good.
So when you listen to, a Lark, or when I listen to a Lark or a Mix song, it feels very cohesive and, considered. And as someone who's had tertiary experience doing collaborative arranging, I know like a pitfall can be that you just have these sections that can kind of feel slapped together and don't feel cohesive.
Yep.
Is there anything that you do to keep the larger piece in mind as you go?
Yeah. You're right. It can be. And maybe that's one of the reasons that I call them Franken babies. Cause it's, we just pull a little torso out of the closet and we make an arm and we stick it on, and then we make another arm and we stick it on. But part of the collaborative process means that we're always going back and stepping back from our little Franken baby and kind of, tipping our heads, and we're going, that arm does not fit. We got to rip that arm off, and so I think that's one of the reasons that it takes so long, because yes, it very easily can be wrong arm, wrong eyeball, right hair, and that's not it. That ain't it. So it's a lot of going back and looking and changing and not being afraid to squash one and throw it in the trash can.
Totally. You've mentioned how tough it is, and you're a teacher leading a class in some way. So do you think that it's something that it's worth exploring at the scholastic collegiate high school level, where you don't have an Erin Hackel in the room to like guide you?
Right. The answer is I do, but it might perhaps be on a more limited basis, right? And it might be a song that is already conducive to that. And there are lots of those that I think Lark, my previous Lark, because we have all new rep now, did a song called Hey Mommy that essentially has this built-in trio that's, it's an ostinato through the entire tune. And so some songs, already have something for you to hang on to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, that trio has to happen. So let's build that trio. And now let's throw a lead on top. And then, hey, bass, I think, what do you think? Where do you think you should come in? And so I do think it's a worthwhile activity. Will they create something fantastic? Well, I mean, I think I only create something that's okay, like 1 out of every 5 tunes. So, and I've been doing it for a really long time. Yeah. But I do think it's worthwhile.
Yeah. And I'd imagine like it's as much as the process, it's the ownership of the material that I think is kind of unique in what you're trying to encourage, because as much as I love, an acapella group singing a professional chart, there's sometimes a degree of separation between the material and who, created the material for them to sing. So,
well, and what I've come to find out now is that each of those songs are created for those people. And I won't reuse those tunes because it's not going to work. It was created for those people. And yeah, I mean, of course, can someone else figure it out and sing it? I had somebody who did a fantastic job at high school, did their own cover of our version of Bottom of the River, Mix's old version of Bottom of the River. And they did it from front to back with no music. They just learned it by listening to our version over and over again. And it was really impressive. But for me, the point is to put up a unique piece of art that blooms on that stage in that moment, And the singers, because it is their own part, are able to tailor and change and, move around and do different things. But for me, it's kind of a one-off. It's like, I knew when I was in Hong Kong with Lark, where I had 5 people graduate, and they sang their set, and I just had tears running down my face like a dum-dum because I knew it was the last time that I would hear them sing that song.
Yeah.
And it was very moving. I won't do it again. It won't happen.
Yeah. So since you have a background in pedagogy and voice performance, I would assume that's a big part of what you try to instill and what you try to teach to students in Lark and Mix. So how do you sort of balance the technical aspects with all of this collaborative arranging and all of this defining who we are? How do you mix all those elements together with the time that you have?
That's a kind of a parallel path that I've been on, because also, when I came in to teach at a contemporary university with my beautiful, lovely degrees and my, gorgeous classical training, I knew how to sing and I knew how to teach singers how to sing. But whoops, I don't know how to teach contemporary singers how to sing. Oopsie. And so I had a huge problem, and I had to set about fixing it because I had young women especially, but men too, who wanted to belt. They wanted to belt high. They wanted to be able to sing in pop styles, country styles, whatever. And I had no tools, none. And, you may or may not know, or your listeners may or may not know that, in the past, there has been a bit of a stigma in classical voice teaching circles against contemporary styles of singing. And many classical teachers wouldn't know how to teach it, like me. But there was also sort of a feeling that it was dangerous and you could hurt your voice. And generally, the sort of go-to for instructing people who wanted to sing like that was just take your chest voice, so not too high, and then switch into your head voice, which of course produces a terrible contemporary sound. That's not it. That's awful. And so I kind of set off on a little parallel journey as I was learning about acapella, about how to healthfully and correctly teach contemporary singers. And I went a few places and I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of figuring out on my own voice. I had never belted in my life. And I learned how to do it myself. So it was long and hard, but in the end, my singers are healthy belters. I feel happy about how they are singing.
Something that's interesting to me is already I know that a lot of classically minded folks and teachers probably would lean away from contemporary stuff to begin with, but then you have contemporary acapella where you're providing not only the solos but the instrumentation at the same time. I'd imagine there's an expectation that there will be even more strain on the voice, and I know a lot of classical schools will be like, don't join the acapella groups because you'll ruin your voice forever. Are there any specific things that you try to instill to make sure that your singers' voices don't disappear at some point?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. We have a luxury because of the school that we go to, in that we rehearse with sound. We rehearse with microphones. And one of the keys to not hurting your voice is to not push too hard, right? And so, and to not, for example, if you have a bass who's not really a bass, they're kind of a bass, and you have him singing at the very bottom of his range for 2.5 hours, he's going to blow his voice out, but not if he's correctly amplified, right? Because then he doesn't have to make nearly as much sound. And so one of the ways that my singers stay healthy is by not pushing, not singing too loud. And, you know, we rehearse on Fridays in a dance studio so we can do movement. And I'll never let them oversing in there. It's not worth it. Same thing for sound checks. You know, I'm not going to let them run through a 20-minute set for a sound check. You know, it's going to blow your voice. And just being smart. I don't let them sing sick. You know, if your chords, if your vocal folds are swollen, leave them alone. You know, rest, just rest and hydrate. And everybody wants some kind of a magic trick. I've never found a magic trick, you know, rest and hydrate and they will get well. But if you sing on them, I had a little high schooler, who I was coaching in a show a couple years ago, and she hemorrhaged her vocal folds in choir because she sang while she was sick. And, you know, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. So in the classical world, you know, you're going to save the high stuff, right? The classical singers do a lot of marking. You know, you're not singing full voice, and you're certainly not going to sing the high note every single time it comes up in rehearsal. And so I think that is really important for contemporary singers too. That said, when they're amplified, they have a lot more stamina.
Since vocal technique is such a personal thing and it really depends on what the singer knows and how they've learned to sing, how do you work with in a larger set? Like, how do you work with Lark since there's so many people in that group versus like working one-on-one with someone?
Well, I have the luxury that most of those people are my private voice students. So once again, that's pretty unique. Not all of them, but a lot of them are my private voice students. And so we work in the studio by ourselves. Other than that, it's pretty easy to give tips on the fly to someone that you isn't making the sound that you want. So, you know, an easy example would be if I've got a low alto, and I want her to be singing something that's very rich and has a lot of warmth and depth to it, but she's making kind of a more pointy noise that might be great if she was belting something higher. And so I'll just say, you know what? Let's bring your larynx all the way down here. Nice, very, very low larynx. And then that'll instantly change the color into something that I'm looking for.
For the run-of-the-mill collegiate high school group that's, you know, running their rehearsals unamplified in a practice space, are there any general tips that you might give them to, you know, they obviously don't have the microphones, but what can they do to preserve their vocal health as best as possible while making the creative choices and hearing what it needs to sound like at the end of the day? Yeah,
for sure. You know, I would always keep my rhythm section in the middle of the group, first of all. So bass and drums in the center. And, you know, it's your bass who's probably going to have the most trouble projecting, right? Depending on the voice. And then filter out from the side, right? And then go lowest sort of to highest, because it's the high frequencies that you're going to hear the best. So if you sort of stick those people kind of, you know, on the outsides of things, that everybody has a much better chance of hearing. And then depending on where you're rehearsing, man, you cannot beat a stairwell. Stairwells are so good for, you know, maybe not necessarily when you're crafting the piece and you know, you need a piano or whatever, but once you've got a little bit under your feet, so you've got natural reverb and some juice to the tone. So you know when you're singing and you feel like you just sound like crap because
Most of the time,
it's so dry. It's just so dry, and a stairwell like fixes that right away. Like everybody sounds great, and you can hear better. And then a little bonus, you've got people coming up and down who probably are going to be like listening to you and maybe giving you some praise. And so I mean, I have amplification, and I'll still go find a stairwell for us to sing in. It feels good. It's a nice little trick.
On the topic of belting as well, in one of the videos that you did for the Women's Acapella Association, which we will link in the show notes, and you should also check out, you kind of talked about how there's kind of this new cliche in acapella of, at a certain point, there's going to be a long-held high note, and that's the crux of the piece. And from watching a bunch of acapella shows, I know I'll often just be sitting there, it'll be like, it's about 2 minutes, it's about to come, and then everybody claps, and that's the only part in the song where anybody claps, and it's so disappointing. But like, how do you make that? How do you get around that and make something that's intriguing to listen to and creative and still high energy without having to have somebody scream an F?
And I rarely actually, I think I had Lark do one tune last year where they had the screamy belt, and the audience loves it, and there is value to that, right? But I do think of it as kind of a personal challenge to not include that and still be great. So yeah, other things that you can rely on, it's got to be sort of the strength and the arc of your arrangement and how you deploy the voices. For me in acapella, there has to be an arc. There has to be ebb and flow, and some maybe a portion of collegiate acapella ends up being verse, chorus, verse, chorus, and everything's kind of at the same level until you get to the high belt, right? And so I think specifically building moments that are unexpected, that's probably the challenge I have every day. And I'm doing it right now with my new group where I'm like, what movement can we do? Let's talk about a concept, for this particular piece that we're doing, and then let's do very unexpected things you've never seen on stage before. So I think that's a piece of it. And then the other part is probably brand, and making sure that you as a group know what your brand is, and filtering everything you do through that. And then you're delivering to the audience in a way that they are happy to receive, because they're like, oh, it's Lark, they're going to be weird. I know it. I know they're going to be like, it's going to be something really strange. And right. And then they deliver and that happens, and you're like, oh, the singing's going to be great too. Fun, right? And so I think that's helps, to filter everything. Lark is never going to do a sexy song. It's not their brand, right? Yeah. They're not doing it. They're not going to do, weird, whatever, like body rolls, and like it's other people's brand, and other people do it really well. And that's great. But it's not their brand. And so if they did that, the audience would be a little like, this isn't right. This isn't exciting for me.
Yeah. Something that we talk about a lot is that acapella groups just in general aren't necessarily made up of musicians or students, at least, who study music in a professional manner. And oftentimes when I hear groups, one thing that I hear a lot is a lot of nasal singing, whether it's in the soloist or in the background. So coming from a voice performance background, what suggestions would you have for students who don't necessarily have resources to learn about proper singing without a nasal tone to it.
Funny you should mention it. I'm just starting my new business. It's called Spectrum Singing. And it is an online voice coaching, voice lesson platform where I will be teaching my method along with, right now, my apprentice, Michelle Rocket, is actually teaching. The two of us are. So feel free to link to Spectrum Singing.
We will.
It'll be in there.
And it's set up so it's it's kind of like this. It's what we're doing right now, except you'd be having a voice coaching. So there you go. There's a resource. As far as other things go, and especially the nasality is actually really easy. And also very difficult. So your voice becomes nasal when your soft palate is down. So if you find you can find your soft palate really easily just by snoring or snorting. Both of you do it. Go. Great. Okay. So if it's up, then no air is coming through your nose and you will not have a nasal sound. If it's down, then there's a lot of air coming through your nose and you're going to have a nasal sound. So it is as simple as saying you won't be nasal if you lift your soft palate. That is absolutely true. Figuring out when your soft palate is lifted or not is a little more tricky. So for example, lift your soft palate, guys. So here's your test. Sing an ah, and then you're going to plug your nose. And if the sound changes, then your soft palate is down. So if the sound stays the same, then your soft palate is up. So it's a little bit of a funny little test that you can do to check your nasality.
Very cool.
Dang. Well, we will not try to get any more out of Spectrum Singing from you. We will encourage everybody to go sign up, because if you can't tell from that, Erin clearly knows her stuff. We're reaching the end of our podcast today, but we generally like to end with asking you what trends you're excited for and what you're hoping to see in acapella in the next few years, and then what's next for you, Spectrum Singing aside.
Oh, wow. Oh, man. What trends do I see? I see everybody getting so much more creative, which I love. I mean, it's so incredible to see that. And I hope that sort of sense of individuality continues to sort of blossom. When I first started and I lost all the time, everybody was standing in a semicircle wearing the same colored shirts. And doing the akabob. And I mean, from that to what I see now is just mind-blowingly different. So I love that. For me, I continue to sort of want to push things beyond and change and do things that haven't been seen before, sort of push some boundaries. So I mean, you can look for Lark. Lark will be around this year, performing and competing, and then I'm gonna be doing a little. Shall we call it a remix? Mix is going into a little cocoon phase right now, and then come April, come take a look and see what Mix is up to.
Cool.
I'm very intrigued by that. Sweet. Well, as we've mentioned in the previous episodes, we will be at SoJam, and Erin will also be teaching a class at SoJam. So do not hesitate to go to that if you are there. Thank you so much, Erin, for joining us this week.
Thank you.
And we hope that we see you next week. No, here, just tune in next week for a new episode of Headvoice.
You're listening
to Head Voice, bringing you inside the minds of the best in contemporary acapella. I'm Candy Corn.